Hello, welcome back. I got another section of three more words, here for you by Ashley Rhodes Corder. Three Little Words, if you're wondering, is her first memoir where she covers her time in the foster care system herself as a child. And this is Ashley's story beyond her childhood in the foster care system and actually as a foster parent. So if that sounds like something you're interested in and you're just joining us for the first time, first of all, hi, I'm Julie. I read books over here, and we started this one a few sections back, so you can just go back through the videos and get started at the beginning or wherever you happen to be. We've got about 4 more sections of this book to come, so if you want to stick around for that, make sure you subscribe so you can follow along with the rest of the book. And I think that's all I've got to say up top here. Oh, well, 3 Little Words I did read on the channel a while back, so if you're also interested in reading that one, like starting from the beginning of her story, you can go back and find that on the channel. I believe I read it in the spring of 2021, so a while back, almost 3 years ago, but you'll be able to find it in my videos. Without any further ado, let's jump into our book here. We are on page 191. We're in the middle of chapter 12, which is titled That's the Ticket. And we just had them get a new child potentially in their placement, Lillian. So we're going to find out what happens with her. Page 191 at the page break. Within a few days of filing to run for the Florida Senate, state-level party representatives scheduled a lunch with me. They talked about my competition. The current senator was Jack Latvala, a moderate Republican. "Have you heard the expression, all politics is local?" one of the party reps asked. "Start by making a list of everyone you know in the area, even if they aren't in your district. They will talk to their friends and associates who could vote for you." "My Boy Scout network is huge," Eric said to them. "Not to mention Ashley is well known for her child welfare advocacy and often appears on television and radio." Eric took over most of the logistics while I concentrated on my classes, internship, and prenatal appointments. Eric's research brought some worrisome news. "No wonder nobody would run against Latvala," he said. "He runs a printing company that can turn out posters and political paraphernalia. Maybe I should hire him." We both burst out laughing because of the absurdity of our undertaking. How naive we had been to think I could put together the network and funds needed to run for the Mosquito Control Board, let alone the state senate. The newspaper reported that Mr. Latvala had raised more than $500,000, while we had cobbled together a ludicrously small campaign fund. Since we couldn't compete with my worthy opponent's ability to blanket the district with signs, my friends moved around waving banners at various key locations at rush hour. Others volunteered to go door to door and talk me up. We had flyers at various events. Phil, who had made dozens of commercials for candidates from both parties, most of whom won their races, produced one for me. I spoke at various functions and was solicited by a variety of sources wanting to be paid for their services. The most nerve-wracking moment came when I had to be interviewed by the editorial board of the Tampa Bay Times. Their questions were tough, but I was prepared. They wrote an article that could have been far less flattering. "I know what it's like to be impoverished, have lived the child welfare system, felt the impact of budget cuts. I've been able to experience firsthand what happens when we don't have legislative priorities in place." They quoted and then told more about my background. In the article, Mr. Latvala called me very bright. He also said that while foster care is a very important issue, we've really got a plate full of big issues. Eric loved the article's last line and read it aloud. Asked why she didn't first try for a smaller post like school board, Rhodes Corder joked that the Senate is the natural next step for this former 5th grade class president. I wanted to jump in feet first. Go bake or go home. A transporter delivered Lillian, at the exact time Sheila, our new agency's targeted case manager, had arranged a visit with us. Eric unbuckled Lillian's car seat and lifted her out. When he placed her on the ground, her knees buckled. She couldn't even put her limp arms around his neck, and so he carried her in a cradled position into our home and propped her on the corner of our couch. "Is she ill?" I asked Sheila. "No, she'll be fine in a minute." "Does she have some other impairment?" Eric asked. Lillian was drooling like a much younger child. "No, that's just her meds. I'll go over the weaning plan with you." Sheila went out to her car and found the child's stuffed kitty and tucked it under her arm. Then she came back and handed me some pharmacy bottles. "Discontinue these two immediately and cut back as per the list. She should be detoxed in 2 weeks." "Will she go through any sort of withdrawal?" "Hard to say. We don't have much experience in children this young on so many drugs." I caught Eric's look of disgust. By dinner time, Lillian started to emerge from her zombie state, but she still needed to be spoon-fed. I bathed her while Eric made notations in a notebook about any marks or bruises. She was a beautiful child, with huge green eyes and straight straw-colored hair and bangs, normal bruised knees, and a black and blue mark near her left elbow. I photographed them for reference. We both wore rubber gloves the first time we diapered her. She had a mild diaper rash, nothing we hadn't seen before, and a few spots that either were normal discoloration or from something that had healed. There were no fluid-filled or healing blisters. "Doesn't look like she has herpes now," Eric said with relief. "How does a kid her age get herpes anyway?" "I think babies can get it if their mother has an active case while she gives birth. That's one reason for C-sections," I said, having read about it in one of my pregnancy books. That night, we were too tired to read Lillian's paperwork. The next day, though, our innocence turned to horror. I had woken up earlier than Eric. I made myself a nutritious smoothie, let the dogs out, and sat on the patio, watching them frolic before tackling Lillian's thick file. 2 pages in, I started to perspire. I almost woke Eric up, but forced myself to get the full picture before I panicked. Besides having herpes, she had been diagnosed with a severe case of HPV, human papillomavirus, which she had acquired through sexual contact. I looked at the top of the page. This had been written by an intake caseworker. Maybe she had misunderstood something. I knew personally how often children were misdiagnosed or falsely labeled. I flipped to her medical paperwork and found a forensic report from the Child Protection Team. There had been indications of sexual abuse at her 6-month exam. She had been to the doctor for chronic bladder infections, sexual abuse noted again at 1 year. I began to quake. Why hadn't the agency warned us? The therapeutic agency's documents said nothing about sexual abuse, only the shock of the dead body and needing to wean her off her meds. I hurried upstairs and lay down next to Eric, gasping. "What?" he asked as he roused. "You okay? The baby?" "The little girl. Lillian. They didn't tell us. Horrible sexual abuse since infancy." "What the?" He sat up abruptly. "We can't keep her." "I know," I said. "Here's the thing. Foster parents weren't worried most about false allegations of sexual abuse. As a stay-at-home dad, Eric was already viewed suspiciously by some people, and as a well-known person in the child welfare field, I could be a target, and even more so now that I was running for office. Brian and Beth had just gone through an inquiry because a disturbed child accused his foster father of hitting him, even though the boy didn't have a bruise, and his story kept changing. Eventually, Brian was cleared, but he was put on suspension at his job, and the accusation itself remained on his permanent record. Her medical report says she's had so many genital warts and blisters that her anus was unrecognizable. Also that she had significant signs of penetration. Eric exhaled through the corner of his mouth. His face was mottled with rage. I don't know who could take better care of her than we could. You want to take the chance? We talked about the risk. She's 2, he said, and doesn't have much language. I don't think she's going to make up wild stories. Yet. She probably won't be with us more than a few months anyway. We can talk about these issues with the agency, I said, and then we can decide. He reached over and kissed me. Hiya, came a sing-song voice. Lillian toddled into the room without the previous stumbling walk or flat tone. She reached her hands up for me to lift her onto our bed. Eric looked over his shoulder at me. He was right. We were keeping her. Having a little girl was different. Although foster parents were not supposed to cut their charge's hair, hers was so uneven and matted that I took her to the beauty parlor so her bangs were straight and her hair fell in a sleek bob. After so many boys, Gay and I shopped for cute clothes and found bargains at a local consignment boutique. Gay and Phil also treated me to some maternity clothes for my travels and the campaign. While we were out shopping, I got a call from Luke, who only phoned when he had a problem. What's wrong? I asked reflexively. I'm in the hospital. Oh, Luke, are you okay? Yeah, sort of. Some asshole hit my motorcycle with his truck and almost got me killed. I broke my leg and my bike is ruined, but I have a lawyer who's going to sue the driver for everything the guy has. I'm sorry you're going through this. What hospital are you at? Oh, I'm not sure. I gotta go. He quickly hung up the phone. I took a long breath and realized I hadn't told him I was pregnant. My fingers hovered, ready to text him back, and then I stopped. Something about his story seemed odd. When I got home, I checked the county website for incarcerations and saw that Luke had recently been arrested for fleeing the scene of an accident, with property damage, driving on a suspended license, and various other charges over the last year. There was always some critical piece missing from Luke's wild stories. I couldn't understand why he was determined to stand in his own way and be his own worst enemy. When Bonnie came for the first in-home therapy session, Lillian twirled into the room in her watermelon-colored pinafore dress and twinkle-toe sneakers, with Bella the Chihuahua following like a shadow. "Hello, Miss Bonnie," I said. "Hello, Miss Bonnie," Lillian echoed. "She's a different child," Bonnie enthused. "Yes, she doesn't drool or mumble," I said. "Those drugs were poisoning her. I love her hair. Shampoo works wonders." I left the therapist to work with Lillian and went outside to help Eric in our all-organic, after all my junk food binging. Gay had laughed at that. Vegetable garden. Lillian knocked on the glass door to alert us to come back inside. I gave Lillian a puzzle to work on in the playroom, while we joined the therapist to review our concerns. First of all, we were told she has herpes, but the medical report says she is positive for HPV, I said. If we had known this, we would have asked a lot more questions before accepting the placement. With the herpes, we were thinking maybe she contracted it at birth if the mother had an outbreak, but this kind of HPV is sexually transmitted. A female child with a history of sexual abuse is a problem for us, Eric said, glancing over to Lillian, who was saying, "High five," to Loki and hitting his raised paw. "Why is that?" the therapist asked smoothly. "Because it puts our family at risk for a false accusation," Eric responded bluntly. "I'm on the road several times a month," I said, "which is one reason we've mostly fostered boys." "Everything will be fine as long as we keep the lines of communication open between us," Bonnie said. "Your family has our full support." "That's reassuring, but it only goes so far if this kid blames me for something or some doctor gets the wrong idea." Eric's face blanched. I reached over and he held his hand. "Has there been a thorough investigation? What's happened to the perpetrator?" Bonnie shrugged. "I honestly don't know, but I can get the rest of the case file if that would help." When Bonnie called us back a few days later, she confirmed that the original removal came after Lillian overdosed on her mother's medications. At that time, her two older brothers confirmed that they had been sexually abused, and had seen Lillian abused by the same man, a frequent visitor to the mother's home, she said. One of the brothers said, "I saw Murph Buckles kissing my sister's privates." "So, did they lock him up and throw away the key?" I asked. "The prosecutor is worried about jurisdictional issues," Bonnie said. "Are you kidding me?" "Also," she said in a whispery voice, "they are talking about revising the case plan from the placement with the grandmother to reunification with the mother." At first, I was too startled to reply. I flipped through Lillian's file on my lap. "Have you read through the report on their living conditions? It says, and I quote, 'All 3 children had impetigo with major lesions on their skin caused by the filth in the house. Not only were they neglected, but they were also raped. I'm all for reunification, but does this sound like a place where she'll ever be safe? It's going to take a lot more than a piece of paper and a verbal agreement to protect this little girl, particularly with her perp on the loose." The second week Lillian was with us, I was scheduled to give a speech in the Florida Panhandle. It was a 3-day weekend, and so we invited Penelope and Jasper to come along. Penelope's Girl Scout troop was going camping, but Jasper wanted to join us. He kept Lillian occupied on the 8-hour car trip with books and a magnetic drawing pad. Thankfully, she also napped for an hour or 2. Gulf Breeze is a small peninsula of land lined with a white beach that sparkles like diamonds. Jasper wanted to explore the Gulf Islands National Seashore. Eric was torn. "I don't think Lillian will last long in the sun," he said. "I don't want to spend the whole day in the hotel," Jasper complained. "This conference is filled with social workers," I said. "I'm sure I'll find someone willing to watch Lillian while I'm on stage." When I went to the conference center for a microphone and audio-visual check, I asked how I could arrange for childcare during my speech. One of the conference coordinator's assistants volunteered to watch Lillian. "I'll be right outside that curtain, and when I stop talking, we'll get to go play for the rest of the day," I promised, handing Lillian a bag of books, toys, and snacks. "See you soon, silly Lily." I waited in the wings for my introduction to be over and walked out to the podium. As I was wrapping up my remarks, I could hear Lillian backstage becoming restless. She cried out, "Mommy!" in a frantic voice. "Mommy's coming right back," the babysitter whispered. She opened the curtain to let Lillian peek at me through the slit, thinking that if she saw me, she would quiet down. Lillian broke loose. "Mommy!" She rushed toward me, arms reaching out. I bent to calm her. She sighed with relief, turned slightly away from me, and faced an audience of hundreds of people. Without skipping a beat, she stepped forward, bowed, and said, "Thank you, thank you." The audience erupted with laughter and applause. Lillian responded by clapping right back at them. The babysitter looked on helplessly. I waved her off. Lillian wasn't about to separate from her adoring audience or me. I pulled her back toward me and held her hand through the final words of my speech. People with no direct experience with foster youth have preconceived notions about who these children are. I then gave some examples about how many professionals had so few expectations of me. Youth who have been abused or neglected feel worthless, so they are desperate for someone to believe in them. We just have to find ways to enhance their strengths. I mentioned the advocates who had made a difference in my life. Teachers, counselors, and chiefly my volunteer guardian at Lytton. We need to make certain that every child is heard. We must encourage and empower the children we know in any capacity. I've also been a guardian at Lytton, so I understand how complex and frustrating the legal system can be. I'm just completing my MSW. Thus, I have that clinical perspective. I pointed to Lillian. We should be working together to help every child like this one become their best selves and let them shine. I clapped for Lillian. The spotlight on the stage created a halo atop her sleek hairdo. Her cheeks were baby doll pink and her eyes wide with the excitement of it all. It was an electric moment. I felt it. The audience felt it. And Lillian glowed. That's the end of chapter 12. All right, chapter 13, page 202. Hours and theirs. It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Frederick Douglass. In life, you never know what will walk through the door in foster care. The same is true. Only the surprises happen more often. We figured that the next 2 children who entered our home would be with us for a matter of weeks or months. We never imagined one would become ours forever. Sheila called to say that Denver, age 2, and Skylar, age 4 months, had been with an aunt for a few weeks, but she could not handle them and they needed to be moved quickly. Only Denver needs therapeutic care, she said, because his meltdowns are extreme. The baby is recovering from several severe injuries, but has an easy disposition. Any sexual abuse? Thankfully, no. I said I'd call her back because Lillian was being unusually oppositional that morning. She was trying to put on a dirty blouse that was in the laundry instead of the clean one I had selected. If there's anything I'm not in the mood for today, I griped to Eric, it's 2 more toddlers. At this stage of pregnancy, I had many annoying aches. What's their situation? Eric asked. There is an injured baby and a freaked out toddler. I pivoted my hips to take the strain off my back. You know we're crazy, right? We have this election coming up. I have to finish my internship, get ready for finals. I pointed to Lillian, who was trying to hide under the bed. Cope with that little gem. I sucked in a long breath. And in our spare time, have this baby and figure out what to do with a newborn. It sounds impossible when you put it like that, Eric said. But given that we can't change most of those things, what difference will 2 more kids make? We cracked up. Lillian peeked out from under the bed and started laughing too. Maybe it's just for a few weeks, Eric said. We could do anything for a few weeks. The new boys arrived during an afternoon thunder shower. Eric ran out with umbrellas to help get the boys inside. I sat on the couch, and Eric slipped Skylar into my arms. I adjusted him around my baby bump. He just got his body cast off, the worker said. A therapist will teach you his stretching exercises. Body cast? On this tiny baby? Eric took Denver out to be introduced to the dogs so the caseworker and I could talk. The respite home was happy to keep the baby, but they thought Denver needed more services. Sheila said, we didn't want to separate the brothers. So they were with their mother, then an aunt, then respite, and now us. I counted on my fingers. Really, 5 placements if you include the hospitalization for Skylar. What's their legal situation? She exhaled a long breath. The baby's father is in jail. We're hoping there's enough evidence to send him to prison for a long time. We haven't located Denver's father. The mother wasn't present when the guy tried to kill the kids, so she has a case plan. What did he do? I asked, bracing myself. She closed her eyes. It's best if you read the file. Eric brought Denver inside. Way to go, Denver, he said. This kid is a natural with dogs. Denver gave a tentative grin and reached up for Eric to lift him again. As soon as he was up, he flailed to get down. I've got to pick up Lillian from school, Eric said. She's enjoyed being the queen bee and may not like the competition. You 2 are brave, the caseworker said, but I'm sure you'll be fine. After she left, I put the drowsy baby into the portable crib in the living room. I tucked a blanket around him, not an easy feat since my belly got in the way when I bent over. Skylar stirred slightly, then fell asleep with a gentle smile on his face. The idea that anyone, let alone his father, could purposefully injure something this precious was unfathomable. I turned my attention to Denver, who looked like a wary squirrel caught in the middle of the street. When I moved slightly in his direction, he twitched backward and fell. Just like Tyson, he didn't cry, but slumped over in a heap and covered his face with his hands. I sank to the floor beside him and patted his bowed head. He flinched. Slowly, sobs rose from somewhere deep inside. He cried in muted sniffs and gulps. Interestingly, Lillian paid no attention to newcomers. It was as if they were stuffed animals that she had to negotiate around or over. She rarely spoke to them or commented about them to us. It was so peculiar that we decided to be very observant because we feared she might try to undermine them in some way. Denver settled into the routine, and smiley Skylar reminded me of Lance and hardly ever cried. By the end of the week, we were a well-oiled machine. I laid out outfits the night before, and Eric did morning diapers and dressing while I made breakfast. Then he delivered all three to different sections of the same daycare. We spent the rest of the day campaigning if I didn't have class or my internship. After school, Lillian had her snack on a stool by the kitchen counter. Denver went into the high chair, and knowing he needed a strong maternal connection, I cuddled Skylar with his bottle. Amazingly, all three of them slept through the night. We congratulated ourselves on being able to manage this little brood so smoothly. After the first week, I took out the brothers' stack of files. Eric was downstairs watching a Monty Python movie with Jasper, who was spending the weekend with us. The notes detailed that when Denver had been rescued, his face was bruised and bloody. He had been hit with a hard object, and there were so many wounds on his belly and back that he had received a CT scan for internal organ damage. Skylar's tibia, the strongest weight-bearing bone in the leg, had been snapped on purpose. I felt so queasy I had to lower my head. From various accounts, the story emerged. Tiffany, the boy's mother, was living with Daryl Archer, the man she named as Skylar's father. Daryl hated babysitting the boys. Tiffany had a job in an ice cream store while he was unemployed. Tiffany's mother had promised to relieve Daryl by noon. It had been a broiling summer day, and their sardine can of a Tracer sizzled in its sunny lot. There was no air conditioning and little food in the house except beer, dry cereal, and the latest craze, spice. Also known as synthetic marijuana, which was legally available in convenience stores and was known to cause psychotic episodes. If you don't know about spice, it is really, really a dangerous street drug. It's a synthetic thing, and it's awful. Anyway, at some point, Daryl flipped out. He beat Denver until he went quiet and went after Skylar when he started crying. Then he left. Thinking about these boys being abandoned in the steamy trailer, hungry and in excruciating pain, triggered a crying jag. Eric overheard me and came rushing upstairs. "You okay?" he asked. I indicated the files strewn on our bed. The grandmother was supposed to babysit, but she was running late, so this monster beat the crap out of the kids, broke Skylar's leg, and left them alone to die. I handed him the report that said when Tiffany's mother arrived, the trailer was locked with the two unconscious children inside. By the time the authorities broke in, the air was fetid with garbage and dirty diapers, and the temperature was almost 104 degrees. The baby would definitely have perished in a few more hours, the doctor told Tiffany. Luckily, Denver's injuries were more superficial, although he was old enough to remember, as we would soon discover. At first, Lillian seemed to be free of any symptoms from her sexually transmitted diseases. Then, one evening, I noticed some odd pearly bumps on her buttocks when I dried her off after her bath, and so I took her to the doctor. Lillian was sitting on the edge of the examining table, wearing her big girl panties with ruffles and holding a doll. I spoke rapidly, using a cheerful voice to keep her from feeling anxious. "She's our foster daughter," I emphasized. We had never met this nurse, even though we had been in that medical office many times with several children. "What brings you here today?" the nurse asked in a sing-song voice. "A new rash," I said. "It could be an STD." The nurse gasped. "I know, that's horrifying," I said, and I lowered my voice. "She was molested before she came to us." The nurse rushed from the room with tears streaking her face. Dr. Swanson appeared in her wake, and I showed her the bumps. "This is called molluscum," she said. "It will take a while for this outbreak to clear. Is there any ointment or other treatment?" "Sure," she said, writing out a script. "It won't really do much, but it might make her feel more comfortable and make her workers feel better." A few months later, Lillian sprouted lesions on her lips and inside her mouth. This time, the doctor diagnosed an active case of herpes. I wonder if she was contagious before we noticed anything. I shuddered because I had let down my guard during my pregnancy. "Just use infectious disease precautions," the doctor told me. "Your husband should put the medication on her lips wearing gloves and wash thoroughly afterward. You need to avoid all direct contact due to your advanced stage of pregnancy. What about the other children in our home? Make sure they wash their hands regularly and try to keep them from touching each other. Yeah, right, I thought, although we did our best. We gave Lillian her own special dishes and cups and flatware. The dishwasher worked overtime to sterilize everything, including toys. We encouraged blowing kisses to show affection and say goodbye and high fives to congratulate or relate happiness. Lillian's guardian ad litem were a husband and wife team, Edna and Howard Dougherty, who were in their late 70s and worked in Pasco County, which was where she had originally been removed. We kept her home from preschool on the day of their monthly visit and met in a nearby restaurant. We arrived on time, but by the time the guardians showed up late, she was about to reach her toddler in public limit. I pulled some toys out of my purse to add a little time to the meter. How are her brothers doing? I asked Edna. We are hoping to get all the kids back to Mom, starting with the brothers. Really? We were told that they were very disturbed, Eric said. Lillian stuck out her tongue and started chirping like a wounded bird. Hi, cutie, Edna said to her. She turned to me. We are lucky to have such sweet kids on our first case. The caseworker told us that her mother is living with a new boyfriend who has 3 children and a felony domestic violence charge for choking a woman. So how can that be a safe place for Lillian? I asked. We're hoping he learned his lesson, Howard said. I dropped my fork with a clatter. So you plan to put all these kids back together and see what happens? Lillian had touched my heart in a different way than Albert or Lance. I saw some of myself in her girlish ways, spinning in a dress, making faces in a mirror, and talking to her dolls. As a woman, I took the nature of her abuse as a personal assault and had a visceral reaction anytime I thought about her perpetrator. I worried how this would affect the rest of her life. Had she been young enough to forget it entirely, or would it be a dark shadow she couldn't quite shake or even define? With a few of our foster children, Eric and I had the moment when we asked each other if they were available, would we keep them? The answer for Albert had been a resounding yes. For a long time, we had come to believe that Lance would remain with us until a mystery aunt was presented in the final hour. All the others, until Lillian, were too temporary or had positive placements to move on to. What about her? First, she had 2 brothers. We had met them several times during court-ordered sibling visits and realized they were very angry, disturbed, and not only had been abused but acted out on each other. Therefore, they had to remain in separate foster placements until they had been stabilized. They also had been cruel to Lillian, and yet the long-term plan was for them to be reunited with their dysfunctional mother who hadn't protected them in the first place. During a staffing, she admitted that she knew about the sexual abuse but didn't think it was a big deal. Now the mother had chosen another dangerous partner with a violent felony record who had 3 kids of his own. Didn't anyone else see the danger behind this twisted Brady Bunch scenario? My old foster child defense system, turning off all my feelings, failed me when it came to worrying about children in my care, and my inner mother tiger tensed to pounce if I could identify the target. It took far too long for the guardians to order their food. Lillian started squirming, and I took her to the bathroom. She refused to get back into her booster seat. Would you like some ice cream? Edna asked. The guardian should have checked with us first, but we let it slide. I wanted you to know that we're recommending the court reunify with the grandmother first, she said. I snapped. This is the same woman who left the children in a car with a dead person? That was an isolated incident, Edna answered. The long-term goal remains reunification with the mother, Howard added. Where's my ice cream? Lillian cried out. Edna looked around for the server. Just a moment, hon. You know what? Lillian blurted. What, honey? Edna asked. My daddy hurt me. My mouth gaped. "Lillian, where did your daddy hurt you?" I asked. She pointed directly between her legs. Both guardians shot daggers at Eric. Edna turned to her husband. "We are going to have to call this in as an abuse report to the hotline." "You do understand her prior history," I said carefully, just as the ice cream arrived. Lillian had play therapy with Bonnie. Last week, Bonnie reported that Lillian had undressed an anatomically correct doll and poked a toy screwdriver between its legs. I had gone to a staffing the next day with Bonnie and Lillian's mother. When the therapist described this behavior, her mother said, "Oh, she's been inserting things in herself since she was a baby." At that, I had to excuse myself from the meeting and get some fresh air. Lillian started to pitch her ice cream spoon across the table, but Eric was a split second ahead of her and caught it. She kicked. He stood and lifted her from the booster seat. "It might be time for us to be on our way. I'll put her in the car seat." Later that evening, Edna emailed me a copy of what she'd sent her case coordinator and what she'd called into the abuse hotline. She had put, "Daddy touched me," into quotes without any discussion about which daddy that might be, and she didn't even quote Lillian correctly. All abuse reports go to a central hotline, which prioritizes them before passing them down to local investigators. Panic suffused my body, and even my baby began to kick wildly inside me. Would the next knock on our door be an ignorant bully of a worker who would try to nail my gentle husband for hurting this traumatized child? Even though it was late, I phoned Edna. "I just got your email," I said in a steady voice, as I could manage. "You need to clarify that Lillian was not referring to Eric." "Oh, well, I'm sure they'll find that's the case," she said. "Mrs. Doherty," I said shrilly. "This little girl came to us with several sexually transmitted diseases, and she has been living with a child molester who also abused her brothers. You should have made that clear in your report. Someone new to the case isn't going to know these important details and may suspect my husband. You have to call the hotline back and leave no room for speculation." I took a long breath. "Further, Edna, this is precisely the reason we have been wary of parenting sexually abused children. We agreed to take Lillian before those facts were known. But the minute someone shows up to investigate us because of irresponsible reporting, they will have to find her another placement." "But why? You are so wonderful with her. We wouldn't want her moved from your home." My voice was stern. "I realize you are new guardians, but a report like this can ruin someone's life." "Yes, of course," she backpedaled. "I didn't mean to implicate your husband." Thankfully, we were not involved in the police investigation that took place after these allegations. Bonnie confirmed that the child had been placed in our home because of prior abuse. The brothers gave the most graphic descriptions of what at least two men, Murph and someone named Roddy, had done to them and Lillian. The boys described pornography tapes they had watched, as well as seeing their parents, grandmother, and other adults in sexual situations. The investigators said Lillian couldn't speak well enough to get a solid statement, so they dropped the case in a few days. After that, Eric and I became more insistent that if a foster child wanted to call us Mommy or Daddy, that we were to be Mommy Ashley and Daddy Eric, to separate ourselves from their parents. When we learned the sexual abuse case was not going to be prosecuted, I tossed a dishcloth across the room and clutched my swollen abdomen. The boys named the guys who did it, and they get to walk free because the different county departments can't figure out who should take it on. They jail people for possessing pot or for shoplifting, but not for ruining a child's life. I fumed. My schedule was busier than ever, balancing school, my trips for speeches, as well as campaign-related events. My friend Nikki was going to babysit one Sunday while Eric and I attended a political forum. She texted us to say she thought Lillian was running a fever. We came right home and found she had a slight temperature. We gave her a dose of a children's fever reducer, and she popped up ready for school Monday morning. At noon, her school phoned us as I was packing for a flight to California the following day. "Something's wrong," her teacher said. "Lillian's doubled over like a little old lady." I took her directly to the pediatrician's office. The nurse said she needed a urine sample to test for a bladder infection. Lillian refused to pee or drink water or juice. "I'll do it at home where she's more relaxed," I said. "That won't be acceptable," the nurse said. I insisted on taking one of their sterile jars anyway, since it was time to get the other children. "I also want to see the doctor before I go." Dr. Swanson gave me less than a minute of her time. "With little girls that age, she most likely has a bladder infection or constipation, but we can't give her medication without a sample. We can do a swab for strep throat." "Look at how she's standing." I reached for Lillian's hand and pulled her toward me. She was bent doubled over like a pretzel. "Stand up tall, sweetie," I said. I pulled her shoulders back gently. "No!" she screeched. "Could it be something else?" I asked. "I can't do anything without a urine sample," she said. We managed to get a trickle of urine at home, which I delivered to the doctor on my way to the airport the next morning. When Eric called for the result, the nurse said there hadn't been enough to test. I texted Eric for any update as my plane taxied to the gate at my connecting airport. Eric called right back. "She's much worse. She can barely stand up." "This can't wait until I get home. Take her to the hospital," I shouted when he picked up the phone as I changed gates. The message waiting for me when I landed at my destination read, "Lil needs surgery, ruptured appendix." I began to weep. Poor baby, less than 3, and she had been through more suffering than most adults I knew. I phoned Eric. Within an hour of getting to the ER, they diagnosed a perforated appendix, he reported. She had surgery to clean out the abscesses and infection in her belly. Did they take out the appendix? No, they want her to have antibiotics for a few weeks first. You mean another surgery? Yes. If Dr. Swanson had done a blood test, she could have had a simple laparoscopic procedure. Could she have died? I asked with a quavering voice. I don't know, but she was filled with pus and she was in critical condition. I feel like the doctors at that practice treat our foster kids like second-class citizens. Oh, that's not even the worst part, Eric added sarcastically. There was a huge problem about getting permission for surgery. They wouldn't let me sign on, and I couldn't reach her case manager. Technically, only a parent or a judge can consent, but this was an emergency. So, what did you do? I called Maya, and they faxed some paperwork back and forth that will cover it for now. You should have just said you were the father and asked for forgiveness later. I was almost at that point. As we talked out the issues, we both calmed down. I wished I weren't on the other side of the country, leaving Eric with 1 child hospitalized and 2 more at home. Got it covered, Eric said, and explained his plan. I'm going home as soon as I know she's stable. My parents are at the house with the boys. Then Nikki is going to spend the night in case I have to go back to the hospital. He paused. Thank goodness we have friends who are background check babysitters. Eric was spending all day at Lillian's bedside and taking care of the boys before and after school until I returned from my speaking trip. Eric had deep bags under his eyes and a scruffy face. Can't sleep well when you're not home, he said. I'll go to the hospital in the morning, I said, and you can sleep in. I brought Lillian a balloon bouquet. After playing with it for a few seconds, she looked around. Where's Daddy Eric? Every nurse who came into her room looked crestfallen to see me instead of Eric. Your husband has been a saint, the charge nurse said. He reads to her all day long and will do anything she wants because she needs to keep that IV in. He's the best. You have no idea. We figured he was her father, but when we heard he's only the foster dad, well, nobody can get over it. Half the time, we don't even see real parents here for more than an hour a day. She looked at my large belly. Lillian has done best sitting on your husband's lap, but I don't see how your condition will allow that, she said sympathetically. Otherwise, she has to stay in bed and not jump around, or she'll dislodge the IV. I'll do my best, I said. After I read her 2 books, Lillian kicked the blankets into knots. She pointed to my phone on the bureau. Call Daddy Eric, she demanded. He's busy, I said, determined to give him a break. But tending Lillian at bedside hurt my back. I had a condition of pregnancy called severe symphysis pubis dysfunction, which gave me chronic pain in my pelvis. After 2 hours, I knew I had to go home and lie down. I decided that Lillian and the nurses would be happier if Eric came back. And that's the end of chapter 13, and also where we will end this section here today. Thanks for coming along for another section of 3 more words, and I will see you next time. Also, just take care of yourselves. This is really, really touchy stuff, like really disturbing. So, you know, I'll definitely include in the content warning on this section and future sections so that you can be prepared. So take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.